Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Brazil, a key figure in the interim government has resigned after explosive new transcripts revealed how he plotted to oust Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff in order to end a corruption investigation that was targeting him. The transcripts, published by Brazil's largest newspaper, Folha de São Paulo, document a conversation in March, just weeks before Brazil's lower house voted in favor of impeaching President Rousseff. Romero Jucá, who was then a senator but became a planning minister after Rousseff's ouster, was speaking with a former oil executive, Sergio Machado. Both men have been targets of the so-called car wash investigation over money laundering and corruption at the state-controlled oil firm Petrobras. In the conversation, the men agree that ousting President Rousseff would be the only way to end the corruption probe. Jucá notes the impeachment would, quote, end the pressure from the media and other sectors to continue the car wash investigation. He also says he's spoken with military commanders who are supporting the plan and who are, quote, monitoring the landless workers movement, which supports policies of Rousseff's party. And Jucá says he has secured involvement by justices of the Brazilian Supreme Court, saying, quote, there are only a small number of justices he has not had access to. Writing for The Intercept, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald said, quote, the transcripts provide proof for virtually every suspicion and accusation impeachment opponents have long expressed about those plotting to remove Dilma from office. On Monday, the planning minister said his comments were taken out of context, but he would step down. Meanwhile, as Brazil's interim foreign minister visited Argentina, protesters gathered in Buenos Aires to condemn Rousseff's ouster as a coup.
This is a coup which has been made legitimate by the Brazilian National Congress, but it is not legitimate. It is illegal. It is a coup to put those corrupt criminals in power.
A Baltimore police officer has been acquitted on all charges for his role in the arrest of Freddie Gray, who died of spinal injuries last year after he was arrested and transported in a police van. Officer Edward Nero faced misdemeanor charges of second-degree assault, reckless endangerment, and 2 counts of misconduct in office. A total of 6 officers were charged. 4 were directly charged in Gray's death. Judge Barry Williams handed down the verdict in a bench trial Monday, ruling that the state has not met its burden to prove Nero's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The ruling was met with little surprise from the community in a case that many said was the state's weakest. Gray family attorney Billy Murphy reacted to the news.
My information is that they're reacting to this the same way they reacted to everything else. They're reacting calmly. The judge gave detailed reasons for why he thought the evidence was insufficient and why the law did not compel a conviction in this case. You couldn't have asked for a better judge to do it. He was the local prosecutor here for many years. He was a federal prosecutor of corrupt cops for many years. And he demonstrated convincingly that he was not and would not be swayed by any element of the community's preconceived notions about what the result ought to be.
The Supreme Court has overturned the death sentence of an African-American man sentenced to die by an all-white jury in Georgia 29 years ago. Timothy Tyrone Foster was convicted of killing a white woman in 1986. Records revealed prosecutors marked the names of African-American jury candidates with a B and highlighted them in green. Their race was circled on questionnaires, and all were placed on lists marked definite no's. In one case, an investigator hired by the prosecution wrote, quote, if it comes down to having to pick one of the black jurors, this one might be okay. In striking down Timothy Tyrone Foster's death sentence on Monday, Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts concluded, quote, the focus on race in the prosecution's file plainly demonstrates a concerted effort to keep black prospective jurors off the jury, unquote. Foster will likely face a retrial. The Supreme Court's decision in Foster's favor was 7-1, with the sole dissenting voice coming from the court's only African-American justice, Clarence Thomas. In Yemen, ISIS has claimed responsibility for an explosion that killed at least 40 Yemeni army recruits in the southern city of Aden. The attack hit recruits as they lined up to enlist. Aden serves as the temporary capital of the Saudi-backed Yemeni administration, which is fighting Houthi rebels. Meanwhile, a British-made cluster bomb has been found in a Yemeni village, bolstering reports the Saudi-led U.S.-backed coalition fighting the Houthis has been dropping the banned weapons. Amnesty International found the unexploded bomb in northern Yemen. Cluster bombs contain bomblets which fan out over a wide area and often fail to explode until civilians pick them up later. Greek authorities have been clearing thousands of stranded refugees from a makeshift camp along the border with Macedonia. At least 8,400 people have been camped at Yemeni after Macedonia restricted and then shut down its border. Refugees have sought to remain in the area, hoping to cross with smugglers or wait for the border to reopen so they can continue their route to other parts of Europe. But earlier today, hundreds of riot police descended on the camp to evict them and transport them to processing stations further south. President Obama sought to drum up support for the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal as he continues his visit to Vietnam. The pact among 12 Pacific Rim countries, including Vietnam, appears unlikely to pass the U.S. Congress before the November election. All three presidential candidates have opposed it amidst a wave of public protests by those who say it benefits corporations at the expense of health and environmental regulations. But Obama said he believed the TPP would one day pass.
Moreover, I support TPP because of its important strategic benefits. Vietnam will be less dependent on any one trading partner and enjoy broader ties with more partners, including the United States.
Later this week, President Obama heads to Japan. He'll become the first sitting U.S. president to visit Hiroshima, where the U.S. dropped an atomic bomb toward the end of World War II. The governor of Okinawa, which houses about two-thirds of the 50,000 U.S. troops currently stationed in Japan, has requested a direct meeting with Obama. The request by Takeshi Onaga, who was elected on a platform of removing a U.S. airbase from the island, comes after last week's arrest of a former Marine for the murder of a Japanese woman. For decades, Okinawa residents have called for the expulsion of U.S. troops in large part over a history of sexual assaults. The governor spoke on Monday.
Over the last several years, we have heard nearly 100 times that there will be a full enforcement of discipline and a thorough plan to prevent this from happening again. But the reality is that nothing has changed.
That's Okinawa Governor Takeshi Onaga. In Austria, a former Green Party leader has defeated his far-right opponent by a narrow margin in the presidential race. Alexander van der Bellen won 50.3% of the vote, defeating far-right candidate Norbert Hofer, who won 49.7%. Hofer ran on an anti-migrant platform and would have become the first far-right head of state elected in Europe since 1945. Back in the U.S., the Democratic National Committee has allowed Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders to appoint 5 members to the committee that authors the party's platform. Democrats said Clinton was allowed to pick 6, while Sanders picked 5 based on the number of popular votes they've each won to date. DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz will choose 4 members. Sanders chose the scholar and racial justice activist Cornel West, leading environmentalist and 350.org co-founder Bill McKibben, Native American activist Deborah Parker, Minnesota Congressmember Keith Ellison, who chairs the Progressive Caucus, and Palestinian rights activist and scholar Jim Zogby, who founded the Arab American Institute. Attorneys for an Indiana woman sentenced to 20 years in prison for what she says was a miscarriage have asked the Indiana Court of Appeals to overturn her sentence. Last year, Purvi Patel was convicted of feticide and neglect of a dependent, becoming the first person in U.S. history sentenced to prison for what the state said was an attempt to end her own pregnancy. Patel arrived at a hospital bleeding and later acknowledged disposing of her stillborn fetus in a dumpster. Prosecutors accused her of taking abortion-inducing pills even though there were no drugs found in her system, and used a discredited float test to argue the fetus was born alive. In a statement, National Advocates for Pregnant Women said, quote, "We support Ms. Patel because we believe there is no point in pregnancy when a woman should lose her civil and human rights. We know that arresting or bringing criminal charges against people for ending a pregnancy, experiencing a miscarriage or stillbirth, or for being pregnant and giving birth puts all pregnant people at risk," they said. And the leading anti-nuclear advocate, Michael Marriott, has died at the age of 63. Marriott served as executive director of the Nuclear Information and Resource Service for 3 decades, leading successful campaigns to defeat 2 nuclear facilities and uphold restrictions on the transportation of radioactive waste. He also co-founded the newspaper that became the Washington City Paper. Marriott died of pancreatic cancer at home in Kensington, Maryland, on May 16th. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.